We're going to start the programme then with transgender issues, which it seems have never been more discussed. You had the trans contestant India appearing in the Celebrity Big Brother house, the model Paris Lees appearing on the cover of Vogue, Munro Bergdorf, the trans model who was appointed by Labour to advise the Shadow Equality Secretary Dawn Butler. But there is one topic amid all of that some say is still taboo and is hardly ever talked about. And it's what's called detransitioning. It's when people have changed gender. Sometimes they've gone as far as having surgery, taking hormones, actually living as a trans man or woman. But then they've decided to change back again. They stop the hormone therapy and they return to their original birth gender. It is difficult to get any accurate figures on how common this is, in part because there are so few studies on it. Some people say that actually this barely happens at all, but others suggest that it's on the rise. And it is rare for people to speak openly about it. But for this programme, I have managed to speak to a woman who detransitioned late last year. She was born a girl. She spent 10 years taking hormones and living as a man. She even went as far as having a mastectomy before realising that actually she no longer wanted to be male. So Pumpkin, as she likes to be known, stopped taking hormones back in November and now lives once more as a woman. And she spoke to me really openly and honestly about why she transitioned in the first place, about why she later changed her mind, and why she doesn't regret at all the 10 years that she spent as a man. And she also told me about her concerns that detransition is a hidden issue. It is a really fascinating and thought-provoking interview, which began with her telling me about the time she first saw the word transgender.
The first time I found out about it, I was just reading Wikipedia pages, just browsing Wikipedia. Sometimes I do that. And I came across transgenders, like a transgender Wikipedia page. And I was like, whoa, hold on. This sounds like me.
That felt like a fit for you.
Yes. And I didn't know what to do with it. First, I just sheeped out. I just refused to read it further. And I just stayed away from it for a few months. And then later I had this quite shocking experience. I was always a bit of a tomboy. And then I had a summer job and I was forced to dress very feminine. I was forced to wear makeup, do my hair, act very girly. And I was very uncomfortable. And after that happened, and I went back home, that's when that was like a breaking point for me. And I told my mom, and I told my best friend as well, a bit earlier than that. But that was my breaking point, because I was forced to be very girly, and it just wasn't me.
When did you start the process of transitioning?
Right after this. Basically, I told my mom, and at first she just told me that she needs some time to process this, and after a few months I could start talking about her little by little. I showed her some pictures of transgender people who are already after surgeries and hormones, so that she could see that they are normal people, because she only knew about people in the media who weren't necessarily living a normal life.
Yeah. You were looking for her validation then. You knew what you wanted to do, but you wanted her to go along with you.
Well, yes, because alone, I was like 15, and it's not easy to start anything like this at the age of 15.
So you needed her backing.
Yeah. Not just because I wanted her help to start the process itself, like the legalities and the hormones and all that, but also because I lived with her, and that was the time period where we started talking again and we started building up our relationship, because before that we didn't really get along.
Yeah. So it wasn't that there were any doubts for you.
No.
It wasn't that you were trying to convince yourself while convincing her. You knew this was right.
Yes. At the time, it felt like I finally found the light in the dark, or some cliche like that. It was a bit overwhelming at first. That's why I stayed away from reading about it for a few months, because I just couldn't believe it.
So how far through, because the transition process is a slow one, mainly.
Yes.
There are lots of different stages, lots of steps. How far did you get through that process?
I had a mastectomy 3 years ago almost, and I was on hormones for roughly 5 years, and that's it.
So you were well into the process. It
Yes.
wasn't just that you had adopted, because it begins with just dressing, you become your true self on the
Yes.
outside, but then there are the physical changes. But you'd started those as well. You'd started the hormones and you'd had the mastectomy as well.
Yes.
How did all that fit in with your expectation? Did it feel look the way that you expected it to?
Yes, very much so. When I learned about this whole thing and I accepted it, and I learned more about it by looking it up, and I read about hormones, I read about the surgeries. At the time, I was 16-ish at this time, and I wanted to have it all, and I wanted it now. So I'm glad in a way that it's a very slow process.
Did it make you happy?
Yes. It felt like, even though I promised myself that I won't treat it as the ultimate solution to every problem I have ever, I think I kind of did, because, when I went out and people treated me a certain way and I was upset about it, I thought, once I reach this and this stage with the hormones, with my voice, with my surgeries and all that whole thing will just disappear.
Well, you talk about the way they treated you.
Yeah.
That they would misgender you.
Yes. And also I think I kind of thought that me not being able to fit in with groups of people anywhere had to do with this, that I was born in the wrong body or wrong gender, and that once I transitioned fully and I pass as male, then all that will be sorted.
So at that point in time, while the process was going on, is it fair to say that you didn't feel like a woman, but at that point you didn't feel fully like a man either?
Yes.
That left you rudderless?
First, it was kind of a shelter for me, because obviously when I grew up, I learned to socialize in a female way. It's a bit hard to explain to people who don't experience any kind of gender dysphoria, because, it's normal for them. But when I was accepted as a male in a group, the guys treated me like a guy, and that was very comforting, very good. Although it was also strange, because then I was in a whole different world of interaction, like how they are very physical. They pat me on the shoulder. They sometimes bump into me on purpose as a joke, and the way they talk around me, and what words they use, and what topics they talked about. It was a whole new, unexpected world.
And you didn't enjoy that?
I did. But what I didn't enjoy is that women weren't treating me the same way as before. They were more distant, more, I mean, as a guy, what do I know about periods? What do I know about these female-specific experiences?
They were almost dismissive of you.
Yeah. Like if I try to approach women the same way I did before, they were a bit perhaps creeped out by it. Like they were like, whoa, let's keep the distance here.
For people who haven't had that experience, I know that when you are transitioning, to be misgendered is something that can cause huge hurt and upset. Can you put into words why? Because sometimes people will do it accidentally. Sometimes people will do it deliberately to try and make you feel bad. Why does it hurt so much?
I think it hurts so much because it's like they don't recognize you for what you recognize yourself as. Because the whole thing about transition and transgenderism is that you have an image of yourself in your head that is just incompatible with how your gender is in real life. And when people misgender you, you are constantly reminded of this. And most often I saw, and with myself too, that I bubbled up myself with people who accepted me as a guy at the time, even when I was pre-hormones, pre-everything. But they accepted me for a guy and treated me as such. But then when I went out to the real world and I got mammed and, female pronouns and all of that, it was like a slap in the face that, no, you're not there and you might never be there. And that's why it hurts, I think, because, and the more you bubble up in a community where they accept you, the more it hurts, because when you go out, you start thinking less about, oh, I'm not there yet, and more about, oh my God, these people just want to hurt me. Why can't they accept me? Why can't they just use the pronouns I asked them to? But it's most often, it's not deliberate, unless it's, I don't know, a family member or something, because, sometimes parents or siblings don't really accept it. But with strangers, it's not deliberate almost ever.
When did you doubt? I mean, really start to think to yourself, this isn't what I expected it to be, and actually I'm not sure it's right for me?
I think sometime after my surgery, definitely. I was very happy with the surgery. It felt like the right thing to do. I always hated having breasts. And I don't know how long after surgery, maybe a year or something, but I started having these, I started making excuses to myself in a way that I wanted to dress a certain way, or I wanted to do a certain type of exercise, or not exercise, sorry, actions like, I don't know, pick up new hobbies, or I don't know. And I was always like, oh, I can't do that now, I'm a guy. Like I wanted to dress up in a certain way and it was too feminine, or, I like crafting stuff. So I started knitting and I was like, oh, I can't knit on the bus because what will people think of me? They will just misgender me because I will, when you look at someone and the
Because
person
men
is
generally
knitting.
don't knit on the bus.
Yeah.
The idea of detransitioning, going back the other way, is very often, I mean, the whole reason that we're talking about this is that it's very often seen as a taboo within the trans community. Yes. Maybe it devalues their experiences. Is that something that you've heard, you've seen? That fear?
Yes, oh, of course. When I started having doubts, I started looking into people who detransitioned, and any time, in almost any place I brought it up, I immediately got a crazy backlash. There were places I was actually like banned outright, because people think that it somehow invalidates their experiences, that some people turn back, so to say. I think it's a defense mechanism of sorts, but I don't think it's a good one. It's pretty damaging, I think, because people who doubt, I've seen a lot of people making posts online about doubting, and the initial reaction is basically people telling them, no, don't listen to the doubts. Your decision was right. You have to go forward. Don't worry about it. It's fine. And I don't think that's a good approach.
But when you look at them and their decision to transition very successfully in many cases, does what happened to you make you question the validity of their choices? Or do you say, look, I am me, they are them, we can reach different endpoints and that's fine, live and let live?
I think it's a bit of both, because when... I think it's partially that, when I was transitioning and when I wanted to transition, that was the right thing for me at the time. And I was 100% on it, 100% plus 10% on it. And I was very sure about it. I did it. And I was sure about it for like 10 years or something.
So at that time, you would describe yourself as trans.
Yes.
You were absolutely trans. It wasn't something within you that you misread.
No.
It was there.
Yes, it was there. And the reason I how should I put this? I know that there are many people whose right way is to transition. I don't question the validity of being trans itself. I'm just a bit worried about people who are confused and go online, seek advice, like myself at the time, and perhaps come across, the success stories, the perfect hormone outcomes, the perfect surgery results and all that, and they see this perfect outcome, and maybe they don't see perhaps the negative side of the coin, and maybe they go into a bit too hopeful, I think.
Do you ever regret any of it?
No, because it shaped me as a person. Obviously I went through a lot of changes. Thankfully, most of them are not irreversible. But I learned a lot about myself, and it pushed me to study a lot of psychology during these times because I wanted to understand myself more.
Yeah.
So that's why I read about it, and I think I became a better person at the end.
And today, and as we sit here having this conversation, would you describe yourself as relaxed and comfortable and happy as a woman?
Yes.
Do you think that'll ever change? Or is that part of your life dealt with?
I think it's part of my life dealt with because I reflected on this so much, and I think I reached a certain understanding that allowed me to accept myself as a woman and to see the things I saw before as obstacles as part of my life.
That's Pumpkin, as she likes to be known, talking about her experience of detransitioning. And listening to that was James Caspian, a psychotherapist and gender specialist who spent 10 years working with clients in a private clinic who were transitioning. He tried to study detransition as part of an MA course, but his proposal was blocked by his university. In part, his rejection form states because the research might cause offence. He joins us now. James, hello.
Oh, good morning.
As we said there, it was Bath Spa who rejected your application to study detransition. There's some dispute around that, which we won't get into too deeply, but what we can say is that the risk of causing offence was one of the reasons that you were given. I mean, why is this? And we touched on it there with Pumpkin. Why is this such a sensitive issue for the trans community?
Well, first of all, I think it's pretty clear that transgender, that's now an umbrella which really covers anybody that's gender non-conforming, I think, as well as people who transition, has become a highly political issue from more than one direction. It's become the cause célèbre of social justice without any real understanding of contemporary or recent developments, I think. It means that anyone who we might think of as gender variant expresses opposite sex behaviour, maybe feels they're kind of in the middle, is now included in that. And so you now have political parties taking positions on trans, again, without any real understanding of the deeper underlying issues, because most of the people who make the loudest statements about trans are not clinicians, they've not worked in the field, they've not done research, and there's a lot of misinformation that flies around, of course, on the internet. Of course, it's very driven by social media and the internet. I think social media and its brief sound bites has developed a culture of kind of knee-jerk black and white thinking. If you're not for me, you're against me. And that makes discussion and critical thinking very difficult. Things are generally not black and white at all. In most things, they're many shades of grey, and that certainly applies to the trans issue, but it's not being treated as such out in the public arena. It's being treated as a black and white issue.
Well, I mean, Bath Spa University, who we mentioned there, they've said that they've carried out a full internal investigation into the complaint, which is now concluded. They say they will respond as required if the matter's pursued. I just want to play you this. We're going to hear from the presenter Stephanie Hurst after midday. She transitioned to a woman a few years back, and this is why she thinks that people in the trans community don't like talking about detransitioning.
The general consensus within, and I don't want to speak for everyone else in the trans community, but I think that I think people are afraid that we've come so far in acceptance that if we have a conversation about detransitioning, that will make people who originally were against trans people and didn't understand it, but have seemed to have got a little bit of grasp about it now, they'll refer back to their original thoughts going, yes, we told you were right, people shouldn't transition. You know, there's male and female and that's it.
You can kind of see there, James, can't you? If you've been in that position where you've had to climb this mountain to explain yourself to people, you can see why there might be a fear of sliding back down again like that.
I think that's true. I think that when people feel marginalised, they feel very vulnerable to criticism, very sensitive to that and afraid. But we mustn't sacrifice critical thinking and research to people feeling like that. After all, you wouldn't have said we shouldn't research HIV because it might make people feel negatively towards gay men. You know, in the 1980s or 90s, you really wouldn't have said that. I never heard anyone say that. And of course, we need to research things and talk about them to find out about them. And indeed, my preliminary research really shocked me because I discovered more and more people, notably young women, who had, like Pumpkin, taken testosterone, had their breasts removed, regretting and reversing. And I also found that many of them felt they'd been very damaged because many of them felt they had underlying mental health issues that were pretty serious and hadn't been addressed in their treatment. And so when they detransitioned, some of the reports are that their mental health actually worsened during transition as well. So it is very complex. There's also been in the UK very recently policy moves to make it very difficult for professionals, that is psychotherapists, counsellors, people in the NHS, social workers and so on, to in any way question a young person who might come with a trans identity. It's this idea that if you say you're trans, you absolutely are, and there's we don't know why people say they're trans. You know, there are different theories about why people feel that their identity doesn't match up with their body. I can't go into them here. We could take up several programs. But this policy, it's called the Memorandum of Understanding, MOU for short. It basically states that professionals must affirm the gender identity of someone who comes to them, and so therefore you deny that there could be any psychological basis for somebody wanting to transition. Because when someone comes to a clinic and wants to have treatment, to be ethical and in the interest of the patients and to do no harm, one really does need to get a full understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
Yet this policy now actually makes it very dangerous for clinicians to do that. Because there's been political pressure from political activist groups who absolutely deny that any young person could have any other reason for wanting to transition than the fact that they are really, really trans.
Yeah.
And so therefore one must not question it. And this is a very worrying situation at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you, James. James, it's important to say that is James Caspian's view. That particular memorandum of understanding that he mentions there, people have very different interpretations of that. And interesting, you heard a tiny bit of Stephanie there. We'll hear more from her after midday. And she is in favour, actually, of research being done. She says, essentially, we're all human beings. We should look into what makes us us. It is a very nuanced issue. Thank you for this text here. It says, I'm transgender male to female post-operative. I've had to work hard for more than 10 years to get to this point. I had to prove my commitment to change. I had to do 2 years real-life tests, living as a female before even starting the hormones, 8 years before the operation. Transitioning is now too easy. It's all given to you within a few years, no time to live a life and decide who you are. Do get in touch. We'll talk more about this after midday on the programme. But if you have lived experience yourself, maybe a friend, family member, loved one, let us know how it was for you. 85058 at BBC 5 Live. It's just gone 10:30.